This is Harry Judd for Boxing Social. I'm delighted once again to be joined by Dan Rafael. It's been a few weeks now since I last spoke to you. So, Dan, first and foremost, how are you, mate? You all good?
Doing good. A little bit of a slow boxing moment right now, but it's going to pick up a little bit before the holidays, so that's good.
It seems here fight week every week in the UK. It's fantastic. Hopefully, it does get a little bit slower towards the end of next year. But look, let's crack straight into it. You've written a piece in your newsletter. I will put the description to that in the description of this video so people can get access to that. Tank Davis and Ryan Garcia, April 15th, Las Vegas. We'll go through some of the things you've highlighted, but first and foremost, mate, what's your instant thought with that one?
I think it's a great fight. I mean, I'm certainly not breaking big news by saying it's a fight that a lot of people are looking very much forward to, including the two fighters. You know, Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia have both eagerly pushed for this fight. It took some kicking and screaming from their teams, but the two boxers should be commended for really showing a great desire and a willingness to do this match. This fight would not have happened, or at least it's not happened yet. It wouldn't have gotten to the point where they've at least made an agreement without the really strong pressure from the athletes, and that's important. But it's a great matchup. I mean, you got two of the most exciting fighters in boxing, two guys in the prime. Both guys are undefeated. Both guys have big aspirations. Both guys have different kind of styles. Both have different fan bases. It's everything you really want to see. You know, it may not be for a world title, but does anybody care? Because they're doing the fight at a 136-pound catch weight. So Ryan had moved up to 140 for the last two fights. Tank had fought there once previously, but went back to lightweight. Ryan didn't want to come all the way back down to lightweight. I don't know how or why they agreed to go at 136. That means mainly that Gervonta's second-tier WBA title won't be at stake, but that doesn't matter. I think the most fans, they're interested in the fight, title or no title. But as a small point of reference, it seems to me anyway, maybe somebody could think of a better one, but at least in the last few years anyway, the biggest non-title fight that we've seen in boxing.
Yeah, and I think that's a lot of people are on about things like that in terms of titles getting in the way of the big fights happening, and I think this is hopefully going to be a catalyst in terms of that. But yeah, again, you highlighted some. It's not a done deal at the moment. It's not an official announcement. This is obviously been both on their social medias. It does seem that this is the closest we've been so far in this happening. So go through some of the highlights and some of the things that need to happen for this fight to be formally announced, Dan.
All right, sure. So like you said, the two fighters, they put it on their social media. You know, Ryan's team sent out a press release. The people at Showtime acknowledged that the fight is agreed to. They sent out a couple of comments from their boss, Steven Espinoza, and the other folks involved. You have Oscar De La Hoya, who is Ryan's promoter from Golden Boy. He put out his comments. You have Joe Markowski, who is one of the top executives at DAZN, who has been televising Ryan Garcia's fights, making his comments. So everybody involved is in agreement that there's an agreement. But as you know, in boxing and in anything, the devil is in the details, right?
Mm.
They're gonna at least for now. You have Tank Davis is going to take an interim fight. He's supposed to fight January 7th in Washington, D.C., 20 minutes from where I live. So I'll go to that fight. We can discuss it before that one. So he's taking a tune-up fight. There's no opponent set. Probably going to be a Showtime pay-per-view, almost for sure, but no opponent squared away. He has to win that fight. He has to come out of that fight uninjured. And this is something that hasn't yet been decided, but is a strong possibility that Ryan Garcia also will take an interim fight. I was actually just speaking before we started to tape this with somebody on Ryan's team about what was going on there. And it was said to me they're still sort of hashing it over, deciding what they're going to do. But there's a very good possibility that he too will have an interim fight. And then the same rules apply. He would have to win and make sure he comes out uninjured. I know that interim fights are dangerous because weird stuff can happen. Certainly a loss, maybe an injury, maybe a cut, something that would prevent the fight from happening as scheduled. The famous example that I use all the time, anytime the notion of interim fights comes up when preparing for some big mega fight, is going back a number of years. Of course, Lennox Lewis had a signed contract to defend the heavyweight championship against Tommy Morrison. Tommy Morrison, who was going to make $8 million for that fight, said, let me take a small little BS fight in my hometown. He took that fight against Michael Benn. He got whacked out in one round, and there went the payday, and there went the title shot, and there went a big fight for boxing. You hope that doesn't happen in this case. And besides the athletic aspect of it, which is the interim fights that I was just talking about, you also have the issue that Gervonta Davis is facing criminal charges in a court in Baltimore, his hometown, on an incident that allegedly occurred in November of 2020. A trial date is set for mid-February. It was originally going to be in mid-December, but it was postponed until mid-February. He faces 14 charges on hit and run hit and run accident. So obviously, if he's found guilty at a trial, he could wind up in prison. He faces a maximum of 50 months in prison. And there's a lot of things that could happen. I mean, they could postpone the court date again, I guess. It could be a situation where they reach a plea agreement. Maybe he gets convicted, but he doesn't immediately have to go away and there's time to get the fight in. I mean, there's a lot of things that can take place. Their side seems pretty confident that it will get ironed out. Hopefully it will. But it's just another thing on the laundry list that has to get checked off before they can actually sign paperwork, which everybody acknowledges is not signed. So they've agreed to the split. They've agreed to the date. They've agreed to the weight. They've agreed to fight each other. They've agreed significantly what the broadcaster is going to be. That was a big hang up in these conversations. Golden Boy, which has a deal with DAZN in the United States, and DAZN were pushing hard for them to have involvement. Showtime, which works with Davis, said absolutely not. We're not interested in working together. In the end, they came to an agreement that in fact it will be DAZN that will sit this one out. It'll be Showtime that will produce and distribute the fight. People in the United States can buy the fight on DAZN, but in essence, they'd be buying a Showtime pay-per-view. That would just be one of the platforms that folks could buy the fight, whether it's here in America, ppv.com, fight.tv, your PlayStation, DAZN pay-per-view, whatever, your regular linear in-demand on your normal television cable. So they'll just basically be one location to purchase the fight, but it's a Showtime production. You know what? And in the end, however that sausage was made, if it happens and the fight comes to pass, it's good for boxing. It's good for fans. It's good for the fighters. And it's, it just goes to show you the old adage, Harry, when there's a will and there's a way. I have always maintained that if the athletes push hard enough on their teams and the networks, the biggest fights can happen.
In the UK, I'm guessing that would be available on DAZN. It'd be a DAZN platform that people in the UK could watch this fight, I'm guessing.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to how it will be dealt with overseas because, again, in the United States, it's not a DAZN production. They're not going to be producing the fight. So it might be a situation where it's similar to the United States where you could buy it as a pay-per-view on the DAZN platform in the UK. But then again, maybe the promoters sell it to, who knows? They could sell it to Fight. They could sell it to BT. They could sell it to Sky, wherever. So listen, the fight's a long way away. Honestly, because there's not even contract signed, it's, I think, way too far in front of us to really get down in the weeds on how folks in Britain and all the UK and throughout Europe and wherever can watch this fight. But I'm pretty sure that when it comes to pass, if it happens to come to pass, that the folks in your neck of the woods are going to be able to watch this great fight.
Everyone keeps saying, and you just mentioned it there, this is the fight that boxing needs. What exactly do people mean by that?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a fight that boxing needs. I think it's just a fight that boxing wants. And for a change, it feels like we're getting something that we want. And it's not old guys. It's not shot guys. It's not guys coming off of knockout losses. It's not guys looking for one last payday. These are prime fighters. They are both undefeated. Ryan Garcia is 24 years old. Gervonta Davis just turned 28 years old. They're both in the primes of their careers. And they're putting up that zero at risk, not even for a title, apparently. That's what boxing needs. This fight is just an example of what we need in boxing, which is the best to fight the best for whatever issues related to promotion and television and broadcast put aside, and for the athletes to go after the best. We could sit here for hours and talk about the guys that won't fight the best or refuse to fight the best, or even if they're willing to fight the best, can't find a way to say yes. So, want to quibble over literally every single little period and comma in a contract. Can't come to an agreement on the split, can't come to an agreement on the money. For better or for worse, Gervonta Davis and Ryan Garcia have been able to do so. And listen, their teams, there's members of their teams who are not happy about this deal. Golden Boy Promotions, you talk to them privately, they're not. I mean, they're happy to get their guy the opportunity. They want obviously Ryan to win. They support him in the fight, but they're taking it up the rear end in this fight. I mean, they're not getting they're taking the short end of the stick. Ryan Garcia is getting the short end. You know, basically they bent to everything that the Davis team wanted, and they're giving in. They're taking a lot less money. They're taking on the other guy's broadcast platform. A lot of people would look. I mean, based on what I know, it's not really a great deal for them. But that's how much Ryan Garcia wants this fight, and he should be applauded. And people have mocked him and made fun of him and ridiculed him for a lot of different reasons, whether it's his mental health or because he's got a ton of Instagram followers, which I don't understand why that's a bad thing. But the point is, no one should ever debate or dispute this guy's hunger to fight the best fighters. He really, really wants this fight, and Davis wants this fight also, so he needs to be commended as well.
And also the catch weight 136, does that again make Davis, is that more in his favor than I'm guessing?
I don't really think it really matters much, to tell you the truth. To me, the only thing it really does is makes his secondary title not available in the fight, which is not really considered a major world title anyway. So I don't think that's a big factor. It's not like I don't believe that it's like Davis said, let's do it at 136. So if I lose, I can still have my belt. I don't think that's the case at all. I think it was that Ryan felt very comfortable in his most recent 2 fights that he took in 2022, where he fought close to the 140-pound limit. One of them was not even his idea. It was because his opponent was overweight and he agreed to go up a little bit. And he was very comfortable there and he fought very well. So for him, after that fight, he was sort of like, listen, I'm not going back to 135 if I can't get the big fight. So I'm going to be comfortable here at 140. Tank Davis has fought, as I said, at 140 when he knocked out Barrios, and he won the secondary belt in that weight class also of the WBA. So I think it was just sort of like, how low will he come? And they, I guess, agreed at 136. I don't find that to be any big advantage or detriment for either fighter.
Obviously you said it's a long way to go before the rumored date, or the date which is in your newsletter, the 15th of April. When does this deal have to be announced or signed? When would the deadline be on your end?
Well, I mean, it would seem to be logical that I would say, first of all, it's going to depend, I guess, largely on when is Garcia going to have an interim fight. If he does, obviously the calendar is compressed. I mean, if Gervonta Davis is going to fight on January 7th, you can be sure that it's not as though Davis and Garcia are going to fight on the same card. So they'll be separated by a little bit of time. Here in the United States, it's very difficult to make a big sports event on a Saturday night of the NFL's championship weekend, which is also in January, and there's also playoff games. So you have to be cognizant of the NFL calendar before you try to go make some other event. But if he does take an interim fight, and Davis does, I would think that, going into those events, that they would at some point get the deal signed.
How important is this for DAZN as well as a platform to get this fight? Because there's no secret that they haven't really performed that well of late, to be honest.
I don't think it really matters. It's not a DAZN fight, so they're just the clearinghouse as folks who you can buy the pay-per-view, sort of the same way, at least here in the United States. You could go on DAZN pay-per-view. I could have done it last Sunday, and I could have bought the Mayweather exhibition that he took in Dubai. The same way you can do with this fight, the same way you can do with some other events. So it's not a DAZN branded event. So they're doing this fight. I don't know how or what those conversations look like. I'm sure that they're not happy about it. They wanted to be involved, and they have not made a secret about that. Golden Boy wanted to be involved, but at the end of the day, here's the way I've sort of stitched it together. It's one thing for the Golden Boy and the Tank Davis team to work this fight out, and for Showtime to be involved. But before any of that could happen, you had to get Golden Boy, DAZN, and Garcia on the same page. And where Golden Boy and DAZN were on the same page, both wanting to do the fight, but wanting to make sure that they had involvement, you had Garcia basically putting extreme pressure on them, saying, listen, I don't care what it takes. You better make this fight. And I think they realized that we either bend to what he wants and he'll stay with us, or if we play hardball, we don't let him have the fight, he's not going to fight for us and he's going to leave us, and it's going to be a lawsuit, and it's going to be, what happened with Canelo. So it was sort of like pick your poison. So they are going to put their money in the middle of the table, hope that their guy wins the fight, and then he would come back theoretically to DAZN after that, and as a much bigger name if he beats Tank Davis on a big mainstream platform type of pay-per-view.
It is a really intriguing fight for many, many reasons, but obviously your expert opinion, who's the favorite going into this fight?
Well, I actually saw actual official odds that were posted, even though the fight's not yet 100%, done and signed and everything. And Tank Davis was, I believe, a minus 220 favorite, uh, which made sense to me. I don't know, maybe not that wide, but it's a close match. Those odds, I'm sure, will shift now and again before the fight actually comes to pass in April. But I think that it makes sense that Tank would be at least a slight favorite to open, and part of the reason is because uh, I think that in among diehard boxing fans, he has a better resume. People know him more. I mean, not they're both obviously very popular and well-known figures, but Davis has a few more names on his record, even if they've been guys that were maybe a little bit not at their best weight or a little past their prime. Like Ryan Garcia has fought some good opponents, but he doesn't have a name like a Leo Santa Cruz on his record, or even a Gamboa. Guys who Tank beat pretty handily by knockout, but and who may have been past their best days, but didn't have the fame level. And that's sort of what happens when these fights open up. The book puts down a number where they hope to get money on both sides, and I think Tank is looked at as having better one punch power, maybe. Um, but it's listen, it's a competitive fight. It's like you said, the word you used, which is perfect. It's very intriguing.
Mm.
I can think in my own mind. I can definitely see reasons why you might think that Tank Davis will win this fight. I can see reasons why you would opt and go with Ryan Garcia. You know, I just can't wait for this fight. I mean, how can it be anything other than entertaining? They're going to talk a lot of shit leading up to the fight. They're gonna really go at each other when the bell rings. It's going to be great. I hope that though all the things that need to take place happen so
Mm.
this fight can get actually signed. I'm reticent. Maybe it's because of the number of big events I've seen blow up and go down the toilet over the years, where you get promised a lot of stuff and it never really delivers. Uh, yeah, I'm looking forward to the fight. But as I have mentioned to others and tweeted and all that, I'm not going to get super pumped up until I know there's signatures on paper that they've won interim fights without injuries, that Gervonta's legal situation has been handled, however that goes, and they have a deal in a venue and the tickets are on sale and they do a press conference and there's a press release and blah blah blah. When it's done, it's done. Right now, it's simply a promise that it's going to get done. And pardon me, but I'm not big on promises in boxing. I'm big on actions in boxing. Don't tell me, show me.
Yeah, you've been in boxing too long to be so naive and just, you've seen it all before. So I totally get that. And
Hey,
yeah,
aren't we supposed to be getting ready for Spence and Crawford and Fury versus Joshua and on and on and on? So I'm not falling for the nonsense till it's done.
why do you think, there's obviously many reasons why, and there's many reasons you've outlaid in why this fight has a long way to go before the two end up in the ring. Yeah, I asked Sonny Edwards the same sort of question, and what is the biggest reason why fights are not happening at the moment? As a, just for in layman's terms, really.
There's more than one reason. That's the thing. Part of it is everybody wants the edge, whether it's competition wise, as far as like what's the weight and where the location of the fight is, things like that. There's obviously broadcast issues that come into play. There's what the financial expectations are. I mean, there's a lot of fights that they could have made Spence and Crawford, but there was issues over the fact that they were going to agree to not fight for guarantees and who had say over the books. I mean, there's a lot of different reasons that these fights don't happen. Uh, but sometimes the will of the fighter is in the case with Garcia, who I mean, and again, as I said, I give Tank Davis a huge amount of credit for going forward to try to get this done also. But I believe that the true driving force, the guy that willed this fight into happening, into being, that just was not going to take no for an answer, was Ryan Garcia. And he told his team, his lawyers, and his people, like, get this fight done and don't talk to me about some other fight. Now, they'll talk about an interim fight now that disagreement is done. And again, the interim fight's not even 100%. But Ryan Garcia, you cannot underestimate that him just willing this to happen and just not taking no for an answer and bringing Davis along with him, who also wants to have a big fight. He's fought lots of decent names, but he's never had a fight of this magnitude. This is a real big deal for these young guys.
Are you in support of them both having interim fights?
I think it's a horrible idea. I'm never down. You know, the only thing interim fights can do is fuck things up for the real fight. I don't see any benefit. Ryan Garcia had 2 fights in 2022, so for him to go and wait until April 15th shouldn't be a big deal. I understand that Tank Davis, he fought in May of this year against Rolly Romero, scored a spectacular knockout, and he doesn't want to go into this fight off of an 11-month layoff. But in boxing in today's day at the top level, an 11-month layoff is not a big deal. And to me, interim fights, they only can hurt things usually. I don't see any good. Even if he wins spectacularly, he's not going to be fighting a top guy, so he's not going to get like big credit for that. It's not. I mean, he'll make money, and obviously it's a business, but at what cost? If he happens to lose, or if there's some kind of injury or something like that, you know, it can mess up the fight. The example I use all the time, you know, it goes back a number of years ago. You have heavyweight Tommy Morrison. He's supposed to challenge Lennox Lewis for the heavyweight title. They have a signed agreement. That deal was done. Forget about this deal where it's not done on paper yet. They had a signed agreement. Tommy Morrison was due to make $8 million. He decided it was a little bit too further out on the calendar than he wanted. He took a supposed tune-up fight in his hometown in Oklahoma against Michael Bent, your British countryman. And guess what? He got knocked out in the first round. And the payday went down the drain, and the title shot went down the drain, and a big fight for boxing went down the drain. And when they finally met, you know, a few years later, it was not even remotely the same level of event that it would have been had they fought without that unnecessary tune-up fight. So I do not support tune-up fights most of the time, and certainly not in this case. We've waited too long to see this fight to allow something to screw it up.
Yeah, I mean, we've got one. I'm in Telford at the moment. We've got Anthony Yard is in a fight this Saturday for his fight against Batervia, which is, sources are saying it's on the 28th of January in London.
I've written that. That is when it's supposed to be, and that is where it's supposed to be, at the OVO Arena.
Yeah, and fantastic that's in London as well. Anthony's hometown, and me, biased. It's good to have it in London, in my own country. So yeah, I'm very pleased with that one. Back obviously to Garcia and Davis. If you were to put a figure on it, how many pay-per-view buys do you think this will do?
That's an interesting question, because I was actually having a conversation with somebody on Ryan Garcia's team who asked me the same. I was literally like 20 minutes before we started to record this. I was in a back and forth with this person, and they're bullish on 1 million buys. And I'm like, slow your roll, bro. That's awfully big. It's a great fight, don't get me wrong, but 1 million buy pay-per-views are few and far between. Even Canelo, you know, when he fought Caleb Plant, which was for the undisputed title, granted Plant wasn't as big of a name, did like a little over 800,000 buys. A few years ago, to me, I think it might have been the best promoted fight I've ever covered in 20 plus years of covering major pay-per-view fights, was the rematch between Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. In the United States, you had the backing of that fight of ESPN, which is obviously huge. You had the backing of Fox, which was the Deontay Wilder network for that fight. Huge big, that's like a terrestrial station, massive. They have their own cable station. You had humongous media coverage of that event, and you had 2 big-time TV networks really pumping that fight on a regular basis, especially in their sports events. Fox televises other major sports in this country. They were showing commercials all through the build-up. Same thing with ESPN. They were talking about it every single day on their various sports talk shows, ESPN radio, you name it. Massive promotion. And it's the heavyweight championship of the world. And it's Britain versus America. And it's Deontay with a gargantuan personality. And it's Tyson Fury with a huge personality. And both guys promoted that fight day and night. It was, like I said, it was maybe the greatest promotion I've ever seen. I remember standing in the press room in Las Vegas, and they had the big 2 TV screens up, one on each side of the room. And if you looked over on one TV in the afternoon, you saw them talking about it on ESPN. And if you looked over to the other TV on the other side of the room, you saw them talking about it on Fox Sports Net. That's how big of a fight that was, where those channels, which are viewed by millions of people, were just nonstop on this fight. My point is, as big of a fight as that was, a rematch of a very interesting first fight, heavyweight title, and all the other things I just laid out, 850,000 buys. Not because people rejected the fight. That's still a huge number, by the way. But not because people didn't like the fight, because piracy is so rampant. It's so easy to steal and to take the signal with all the social media platforms, whatever it may be. You know, Periscope and Instagram and Facebook Live and all these different places, Twitter. It's so easy for people to come by, or they can just wait for 5 seconds after the fight's over and go find thousands of videos on YouTube. In other words, it's hard to get that number up right now with the technology. And so when somebody tells me that Ryan Garcia and Tank Davis, a great fight, is going to do 1 million buys, I say, with all due respect, I laugh, because Tank Davis has established himself in this country as a pay-per-view entity. But on his high side, on his best day so far, he's been probably in the lowest 300,000, probably more closer to the high 200,000. And Ryan Garcia, as exciting a fighter as he is, as big of a following as he has with his social media, he's never been on pay-per-view because his fights since his last few years, since he become a bigger name, have been on DAZN, which wasn't doing pay-per-view. They were just regular streams as part of your subscription package. So this is going to be his first ever time as a pay-per-view fighter. And that doesn't mean the fight won't do very good business. You asked me how much do I think it does. I think that it probably can do, maybe north of 500,000, but definitely not 1 million buys. I'm thinking like, it could get to 5, maybe a little bit more than 5, and that would be super successful. 1 million buys is a big monster number. And when I say that, let's keep apples to apples, not the Eddie Hearn bullshit about what happened with Canelo and Bivol. I'm talking about domestically here in the United States, North America, Canada, which is encompassed in that pay-per-view number that Showtime would generate. America, Canada, Puerto Rico, places, right here, that it counts an hour number, not what it might do on pay-per-view in some other country. So when I say 500,000, I'm talking about domestically, not what it might do in some other country. That's the way that pay-per-view's always been measured since it started.
Is there anything that we haven't covered with this that you'd like to cover in terms of Tank and Garcia? Anything you'd like to add before I move on, just as a point of view?
No, I mean, we covered everything. I'm just, like I said, I want the fight to happen, and I'm hopeful, and I'm glad that they've agreed to agree. But I can't get super psyched until I know it's 100%.
The IBF have ordered Usyk fights Hrgovic. Bit of an odd one, really, to choose Hrgovic as an opponent. But let me just get your first initial thoughts with that one, because in your eyes, does that put the Fury Usyk fight in jeopardy?
The Usyk people have said it doesn't, but the IBF beats to its own drummer. They follow their rules. This is not, I guess, a surprise. You say, why did they pick Hrgovic to be the mandatory? They didn't really pick him. He had been elevated in the ratings, not necessarily of deserving to have been put up so high. He's a tremendous fighter and a very good up-and-comer and a worthy contender. But to say that we're going to strip away the title from Usyk if he doesn't fight Hrgovic in a mandatory fight, I find that to be kind of offensive, to be honest with you. But in the end, he did fight what was sanctioned as an official eliminator for number one when he beat Zhang Zilai in their fight, which was for number one a few months ago. And so from that point of view, they're following their rules. So he is the mandatory. Now, the thing about the IBF is what they will do is if you are looking to have a unified fight, you can get an exception to the unified fight if you're going to take a unification prior to a mandatory. My understanding of how those rules work is you can do that, but only until they order the mandatory. So once the IBF orders the mandatory, the idea that you can go to them and seek an exception is kind of out the window. In other words, had the Usyk team gone to the IBF a couple of weeks ago before they made the order, then they would have said okay and given him the exception, as long as the fight took place by a certain time. I guess they didn't do that. I think now the only thing that it looks like the only thing that would prevent that order from moving forward would be if the Hrgovic team was willing to step aside, which now means you have to negotiate. And obviously that means money. And, people are not necessarily looking to part with their money. And, it's going to be a little bit messy. Hopefully they can come to an agreement and work it out but they still haven't even made a deal for Fury and Usyk to fight for the undisputed title. And Tyson Fury's got a fight coming up December 3rd. So I don't think we're going to see any movement on whatever's going to happen until at the very least 2 weeks from now, after Tyson's fight with Chisora is over with. I hope and pray that it doesn't screw up the undisputed fight. But again, as we talk about all the time, my man, it's boxing. Things get fucked up all the time.
Or he just vacates, like we said.
No, he's not. No.
Come on.
The whole point of the fight.
That doesn't diminish the fight. It just diminishes the belt, doesn't it?
But in this particular case, the belt is why the fight's happening. Because it's for undisputed. There has never been a 4-belt undisputed champion. And that's what people want to see. 100% unification of the titles. What happens after that happens. But I do not believe that you will see an Usyk Fury fight if all 4 belts are not at stake.
Really?
It's not that big of a fight without the 4 belts, to be honest with you.
Is it
Usyk
not?
is a great fighter. He's a Hall of Fame fighter, but that's not a massive, massive money fight without the belts. He'd make more money to go fight Joshua, even though Joshua lost to Usyk twice. He'd make more money to go fight Wilder for a 4th time than Usyk, in my opinion. So I've never been somebody that says the belts don't matter. They might not matter in certain instances. In this instance, or let me back up. The belt doesn't really matter in Garcia versus Tank Davis. The belt does matter in Usyk versus Fury. The whole point of the fight is for the Undisputed Championship. If you vacate the IBF title, you're not the Undisputed Champion, period.
But surely it's an intriguing fight between the two. Surely it's got some magnitude anyway.
Absolutely, it's an intriguing fight, but it's not. It loses luster if you can't call it the Undisputed Championship fight. Because there's other fights that I'd like to see Fury. And as I said, I would still, if it's not for Undisputed, give me the fight between him and Joshua. I still want to see that. More so than the Usyk fight. Don't get me wrong, I'm happy to see the Usyk fight, but I want to see it for all the marbles.
Yeah, Eddie Hearn came out only a few moments ago and said that fight is still will be made in the future between Fury and AJ. Again, from an outside point of view, do you still see that as the case?
I hope that fight happens. I mean, when it's all said and done and they write the history of the heavyweight division in this era, you hope that includes Fury having fought Joshua, Wilder having fought Joshua. They've been Joshua and Fury and Wilder have been the 3 best / most popular fighters in this weight class of this time. And you'd like them to see them complete all of those matches against each other. Obviously, Fury and Wilder have had their great series of fights together, but it's time for Joshua to get in on the action. And, you can include Usyk in there in terms of the talent level. He's fought Joshua twice. I'd like to see Fury and Usyk tangle at some point. So I can't imagine that the fan appeal of a Joshua against Fury fight, that they'll allow that fight to never happen when there's so much money in that fight. Now, I can't say if that's going to be, next year or maybe after that, but at some point, you got to figure that's such an obvious match to make. And the same, by the way, goes for Joshua versus Wilder. I mean, they're great matchups. It's what we want to see.
Yeah, because again, with the Fury Usyk fight, it won't be too long until the WBA order their mandatories and etc. So it's
that's why you have to take the opportunity when it's there. When the window is open to make the big fight, you got to take it, because politics and all the other nonsense with these organizations gets in the way. And I don't even blame the organizations. They're following their rules or trying to follow their rules. But to think that Filip Hrgović or Daniel Dubois could somehow stand in the way of Fury Usyk for the undisputed title is just unfortunate. If that were to be the case.
But it's a real possibility.
It is.
Unfortunately.
The world we live in.
I know. And again, Dan, thank you so much for your time talking to Boxing Social, mate. We will catch up soon.